The nature of finite things is they can only exist at the cost of other finite things. This is basically the principle of conservation of energy. So you've been taught about conservation of energy as a sort of a physical property of the universe, of the physical universe. And physicists usually talk about it in terms of like inanimate objects, or sometimes biologists might talk about it in terms of like, animals siphoning energy from other animals and species and so forth. But it goes so much deeper than that. Really, conservation of energy is the nature of all finite things. Because when you have one thing, reality as a whole, one consciousness, the only way to create parts or objects within it is to create forms by subdividing this one object. Every subdivision you see, every cut through a single object creates two objects at the same time, in a sense. This is duality. When you make that slice, you're creating two parts at the same time. We've talked about this in my episode called Understanding Duality, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. Go check that out. We go deep there on how duality works. I give you a list of 100 or more different dualities that are important for you to contemplate. But like, fundamentally, you can't have a north without a south. You create both at the same time. North and south are interdefined. See that? So if what you really want is peace, you can only get that with formlessness and indifference, by realizing the unity that unifies all differences, all forms. Forms are differences. And as long as you're interested in survival and you're attached to survival, then you cannot have peace. And the degree to which you're struggling to survive is the degree to which you don't have peace. And so one definition of what God is God is peace. Absolute peace, infinite peace. How do you get infinite peace? Through complete indifference to everything. And another word for complete indifference to anything is love. Love is indifference. Love is a lack of distinction. Love is a lack of bias or preference for one thing over another thing. You might say, well, Leo, no, that's not what love is. Leo, love is some human emotion. I've discussed this elsewhere. Go check out my episodes about what is love, Part 1 and Part 2, and I've covered love a lot. I'm talking about here a much deeper love than human emotions. I'm talking about platonic love, metaphysical love. So survival cannot be peaceful, and you are attached to survival. Now, so am I. So I'm not blaming you here. So it's interesting to observe that no part of reality can monopolize all the other parts. And yet, almost every part of reality tries to monopolize all the other parts. Have you noticed this? These monopolies don't just pertain to businesses gobbling up smaller businesses, although, of course, that is the quintessential example of that. But even something like a black hole. What is a black hole? A black hole is an object, a form, that is sucking up all the other objects next to it. In a certain sense, the black hole is like the perfect physical manifestation of monopolization. This is what all corporations aspire to. They basically turn into black holes, trying to gobble up everything nearby. It's also what countries and empires aspire to. A country grows so big it turns into like a sort of a black hole, sucking up smaller satellite countries around itself until it creates a giant empire. And then the empire grows larger and larger and larger and larger. And where does it end? Well, what ends up happening is, what you would think like, well, why wouldn't a black hole just suck up everything in the universe at some point? Well, actually it doesn't, and it can't. First of all, because there's not just one black hole, there's many black holes. So which black hole is going to suck up other black holes? You see, if you have two black holes next to each other, let's say black holes extend infinitely far and they can suck up to an infinite far distance. In practice, they really can't, but if you give it long enough time, in theory, every black hole in the universe would eventually gravitate towards itself, towards other black holes, and then they would all start to lump together and sucking each other up. But then how do you determine which black hole sucks up the other black hole? Well, it's going to be the bigger black hole, right? So supposedly in our universe, in our physical universe, there's one black hole that is the biggest, and there's one black hole that is the smallest, and then there's a bunch of millions of them in between somewhere. And so, of course, you have to go through all the nitty-gritty details of, which is bigger than which, and who's going to suck up whom the most. But eventually, it doesn't really matter because all of them will end up sucking each other up. The millions of black holes will turn into thousands of black holes. Those thousands will turn into hundreds. Those hundreds will turn into tens. Those tens will eventually turn into two black holes. One of those is going to be bigger than the other one. And even if they're identical, it doesn't really matter. They're both going to merge into each other, and eventually you're going to end up with what? One object, one single thing. But of course, in practice, it doesn't even work this way because these black holes actually emit bits of radiation. It's called Hawking radiation. So in practice, a black hole is never going to suck up the entire universe because it actually, for a black hole to work, it turns out that the very structure of a black hole is that, yes, it sucks stuff in, but as it sucks in, it must also leak some stuff out. Otherwise, it couldn't work. This is called Hawking radiation. So eventually a black hole, even though it sucks in a lot of stuff around it, eventually it peters out and it dies. Even a black hole dies, you see? So even, you might think like, if anything could monopolize everything in the universe, it would be a black hole, but it can't because even the black hole is a finite object and it's not powerful enough to unify all of reality. The only thing that's powerful enough to unify all of reality is infinity, or God, or nothingness, or consciousness, or formlessness, or emptiness.